We're going to be speaking about some real important stuff, namely diving down into the Old Testament. One of the most important passages in the Old Testament, but one in which perhaps the interpretation has been a bit failing, and one that is really significant theologically, and that's Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 10. We're going to be speaking about blessings and the promises of the new covenant, even while understanding what Moses is saying to the people there in the old, in that giving of the law. So there's all sorts of themes about the law, the gospel, about blessing and curse, about old covenant, new covenant administrations, about exile and return, and a rehearsal of Israel's own life, and then in the person of Jesus, how he satisfies the demands of the law for us. Themes of humiliation, exaltation. So I'll just, give you a whole potpourri of topics we're going to be speaking about. But I think this is right up our alley here at Reform Forum and as Vossians in terms of how we like to approach the Bible. And I believe it's the way the Bible tells us to approach it. So I wanted to open up and just start off by asking you, Will, about your interest in this passage and a more reformed and biblical theological way to approach this. Because it's a passage that sometimes people either think it's a real easy passage to understand and then they go horribly wrong in their interpretation, or they might just not have the proper theological construct in their minds even to approach it correctly.
Yeah, so when approaching Deuteronomy 30, especially text we'll get into a little bit later, verses 11 to 14, I found most commentators spend roughly a sentence talking about that paragraph. And that sentence usually says something to the effect of, this is just a sermonic exposition. This is just Moses saying, go therefore and do it because you're able to, something to this effect. And one of the things that I was working with in light of that was trying to better develop what exactly is going on in the book of Deuteronomy in these particular verses. And I'm doing this as part of a series of lectures for one of my classes here at Reformed Theological Seminary in the Prophets class, where what our goal is to do is to establish some deep structures of biblical theology and talk about the way that God relates to man by means of the covenant after the fall. So trying to establish the way that God seeks to restore a fellowship with him that was broken due to the fall. And I think that it's that restoration of fellowship that Deuteronomy 30 is really focused on. And so if we come to understand how the Lord seeks to restore fellowship to him after the fall in Deuteronomy 30, then we gain a deep structural biblical theological framework that we can then use to interpret the prophets later on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If I may just read the passage, I think that'd be good for people a lot of people listen while they're driving or exercising, and reading your Bible is good and holy and good for your soul as that is not a good thing to do while you're driving. Let me read Deuteronomy 31 through 10. When all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you today, with all your heart and with all your soul, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you, and he will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will take you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it, and he will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. And the Lord your God will put all these curses on your foes and enemies who persecuted you, and you shall again obey the voice of the Lord and keep all his commandments that I command you today. The Lord your God will make you abundantly prosperous in all the work of your hand, in the fruit of your womb and in the fruit of your cattle, and in the fruit of your ground. For the Lord will again take delight in prospering you, as he took delight in your fathers, when you obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes that are written in this book of the law when you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. That's Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 through 10.